We may like to believe that we're rational and logical, but in reality, we continually fall into mind traps, cognitive biases that distort our thinking and influence the judgments and decisions we make every day. In this video, we'll look at 7 common mind traps and ways to avoid them. Google effect. The Google effect, also known as digital amnesia, is the tendency to forget information that's readily available online. Suppose you want to know the height of Mount Everest. Why would you bother learning this fact when you can just Google it? Digital amnesia isn't a failure of memory storage, but a failure of encoding information that we can easily access online. Instead of remembering the facts, we're more likely to remember where we can find the facts. Our brains have learned to treat computers and the internet as an external hard drive for our memories. This is the reason why we use sat-nav to guide us to places we visit regularly or can't remember telephone numbers stored in our phone's memory. Whilst there are undoubtedly advantages to having an unlimited external hard drive, we need to be careful to check that the information we're accessing is accurate. Sunk cost fallacy. Frank is 30 minutes into a 2-hour movie. The film's not what he expected and he's starting to feel quite bored. He looks over and sees that his date has fallen asleep. He begins to wonder whether they should leave, but suddenly recalls just how much he paid for 2 tickets, as well as the effort of getting across town to the cinema. So, Frank decides to stay put, even though he's unlikely to enjoy the rest of the film. This is an example of the sunk cost fallacy, where we continue with something because of the time, money or effort we've invested, even though sunk costs cannot be recovered. Frank can't get his time and money back, so why continue watching a film if he's not enjoying it? But it's not just individuals who are susceptible to the sunk cost fallacy. In 1976, the supersonic airplane Concorde began commercial flights. French and British governments invested hundreds of millions of dollars, but even when it became clear that Concorde wouldn't be profitable, they continued to pour money into it, partly because they'd already sunk significant time and money into the project. In the end, only 20 planes were built and $2.8 billion was spent. Money could have been saved had the project been cancelled much earlier. The rational decision would have been to consider only possible future gains and losses rather than the effort, money or time already invested and unrecoverable. When making decisions, it's important to detach your emotions about sunk costs. It's gone and you can't get it back. Assess the situation rationally and, if needed, be ready to cut your losses and head for the exit. Framing effect. Frank wants to buy a low-fat yogurt, but when he gets to the chilled section, he's faced with a choice. Should he buy the 80% fat-free yogurt or the 20% fat alternative? The products are the same price and contain the same amount of fat, but Frank opts for the 80% fat-free option. Research suggests that most people would do the same. What if the alternative contained 19% fat? Frank would likely make the same choice, even though the alternative contains less fat. But why? Frank's decision was informed by a cognitive bias called the framing effect, in which an individual's choice from a set of options is influenced more by the way information is presented or framed than by the information itself. The same information can appear more or less attractive depending on whether the positive or negative aspects are emphasised. The 80% fat-free yogurt highlighted how much fat had been removed, a positive attribute, as opposed to the alternative, which highlighted how much fat it contained, a negative attribute. To avoid the framing effect, always think through why you've selected an option or relied on certain information, as this can help you realise if you've been too influenced by the way something was presented. Egocentric bias. Jane and Frank have been working together on a team project. When asked how much they each contributed to the work, they both estimate 60%, adding to an impossible total of 120%. Why do they both believe they did the most work? The answer may be due to egocentric bias, which refers to people's tendency to overemphasize their perspective when considering events and beliefs. This makes us more aware of our own work and less aware of the contribution of others. Even when we do understand the work of others, we're more likely to remember what we did due to biased memory. The result is that we often see ourselves as the key player, even if we only played a minor role. To combat egocentric bias at work, Try to see things from someone else's perspective. Try to notice things completed without your input and encourage others to talk about what they did. It can also help to keep an accurate record of who's completed what, so to avoid relying on faulty memory. Just world hypothesis. The just world hypothesis refers to the cognitive bias that the world is fair and people get what they deserve. It causes us to believe that positive behaviours will be rewarded and negative behaviours will be punished. For example, Frank comes home from an evening out and finds that his house has been broken into and many of his valuable possessions have been stolen. Frank's friends are sympathetic but can't help wondering whether he left his door unlocked and his valuables in plain sight. After all, Frank is quite absent-minded and this probably happened for a reason. Psychologists believe that people prefer to view the world as a manageable, predictable and fair place, as this helps us to stay focused on long-term goals and protects us from helplessness. The just world bias can be avoided by stepping back to look at the full picture and considering all the available information before making a judgment. Illusion of control. In a study from 1971, researchers told participants they were doing an experiment on the effects of different noise levels on simple tasks like proofreading. Some participants were given a button they could push if they wanted the noise to stop. Nobody with a button actually pressed it, but just knowing they could stop the noise resulted in overall lower levels of stress during the experiment. It turns out that believing we're in control of what happens to us, even if that's not always true, can have a huge impact on our mental health. The illusion of control makes us think we have far more influence over events than we actually do. It's the reason why Frank believes his lucky t-shirt influences the performance of his favourite football team. Groupthink. The CEO wants to take the company in a new direction. He's a charismatic and persuasive leader, and everyone on the board seems to agree, so it must be a good idea. Individually, however, no one on the board thinks it's the right direction. Groupthink is a psychological phenomenon in which group members stay quiet and set aside their own beliefs in favour of maintaining group cohesion and reaching a consensus. Unfortunately, groupthink can cause groups to ignore important information and ultimately lead to poor decisions. Groupthink can be reduced by breaking groups into smaller groups and increasing diversity among group members. If you enjoyed this video, please check out Mind Traps Part 1, which explores more cognitive biases, including confirmation bias, anchoring bias, halo effect, attribution bias, and many others.